Dr. Elian Krauss had spent 30 years dissecting the past in dusty vaults and forgotten tombs. But nothing had prepared him for this. The skull came not from some distant prehistory. It had been exhumed from a cemetery in northern France, dated to the 18th century. A time of enlightenment, of revolutions and telescopes aimed at the stars. A time, it seemed, when some humans had already begun. Shrinking, the word tasted like heresy in his mouth. Devolution. But it was more than a word. It was a hypothesis, whispered in backroom conferences and encoded in grant rejections. That our brains, once a crown of 1,500 cubic centimeters of glory, had begun to shrink over the last 10,000 years. That Homo sapiens, the wise man, was perhaps growing less wise by the century. His mentor had dismissed the idea as pseudoscience. Romantic nonsense, he had scoffed. We are progressing. Always forward, never back. But Elian knew better. He had seen the charts. He had traced the curves. From Cro-Magnon to Neolithic man, from Roaming to Renaissance to now, the arc bent downward. By over 150 cubic centimeters, the trend, disturbingly, was accelerating. Tried to rationalize. Surely the brain had simply become more efficient. Perhaps it no longer needed such mass. But even efficiency must answer to function. And what function could explain why we now struggle to focus? Why attention spans fray? Why our memories blur like smoke and rain? Worse still was the pattern. In isolated tribes, unspoiled by modernity, the Hadza, the Pirahu, the shrinkage was minimal. But in urban centers, among the noise and glass of cities, the drop was steepest. Civilization was not sharpening us, it was dulling us. He turned to the window. Outside, the city pulsed like a wounded organism. Neon bled onto concrete. People scrolled endlessly on glowing slabs, eyes deadened, necks bowed as if in prayer to some digital god. What if this was not coincidence? What if the tools we built to make life easier were the very chains pulling us backward? That night, Elian returned to his private archive, a hidden room beneath the university's anthropology wing. There, among the forgotten bones and banned manuscripts, lay a letter. It was unsigned, written in spidery ink on parchment that smelled faintly of ash. He had received it years ago, tucked anonymously between the pages of a Neanderthal catalog. The letter read, "When the mind grows heavy, it dreams. When it grows small, it forgets. Beware the century when forgetting becomes effortless. It is not the machines that will destroy you. It is your love for them." He had dismissed it then as the ravings of some poetic lunatic. But now, as he measured skull after skull from the archives, all dated from different epochs, a terrible symmetry emerged. The pattern was not random. It was not genetic drift. It was selected, directed, and perhaps designed. As he aligned the latest data into a 3D model, his breath caught. The modern human brain, shrunk and smoothed, bore eerie resemblance not to our ancestors, but to our tools, to artificial neural networks, to compact learning systems. We were not becoming animals. We were becoming simulations of ourselves. He stared into the empty sockets of the ancient skull. It seemed to look back with accusation. Or was it pity? Somewhere deep in the archives, a light flickered and died. Elian did not notice. He was already deep into the next file. The 1923 cranial cast of a child genius who vanished during wartime. Her brain was larger than Einstein's. She drew the same spiral pattern that had haunted petroglyphs in Namibia and Siberia. She had disappeared without a trace. Elian remembered her name. He also remembered the last line of her journal. "The stars speak when we close our eyes, but no one listens anymore." And for the first time in decades, he felt the faintest tremor of fear, not for the future, but for the present. Dr. Elian Krauss froze. He had locked it. He always locked it. Turning slowly, he saw nothing but shadow. But the air had changed. Thicker now, laced with mildew and something older, like forgotten breath in a sealed tomb. He closed the cranial cast of the missing child and slid it into a lead-lined drawer. Then he reached for the manila envelope marked cranial regression. Redacted cases. He had stolen it years ago from a closed archive beneath the Vatican's Anthropological Synod, a place that officially did not exist. Inside were grainy photographs, skulls with impossible contours, one with no occipital lobe, another with extra suture lines, as if the brain had split and tried to fuse again. All modern, all dated within the last 150 years, and all with missing case files. The most disturbing image, however, was not of a skull, but of a child, wide-eyed, wild-haired. She had drawn spirals on every surface: walls, paper, her own skin, the same spiral pattern found at ancient megaliths like Göbekli Tepe and the Neolithic tombs of Orkney. Her doctors called it neuro-artifact syndrome, but in Elian's notes, he labeled her with something more chilling: cognitive backflow. The hypothesis was heretical, that the human mind, in certain conditions, could regress, not just functionally, but structurally, mimicking ancestral states of cognition: intuition over logic, symbols over syntax, vision over language, and most crucially, submission over self-awareness. Elian's hand trembled. He had seen this before, not in children, but in adults, especially in those immersed too deeply in technological loops. Endless scrolling, algorithmic dependency, passive information feeding. The brain, like any muscle, obeyed what it was trained to do, and modern life trained it to surrender. He reached for a folder labeled Lascaux Reopened. It contained scans from a recent and highly classified expedition into a previously sealed chamber of the famous Paleolithic cave in France. Inside, they found new paintings, but these were not of animals. They were of faces, blurred, distorted, human, but not quite. Each seemed to have the same bulging, softened cranium, identical to modern skulls under regression. One wall bore a crude inscription in ochre: "We saw them. We became them. Then we forgot." Who were they? Elian didn't know, but someone did. A week ago, he had received an encrypted message from an anonymous source calling themselves the Nymacini Cell. It contained one sentence: "We tracked the fall of the mind since Jericho." Attached was a list of names, 37 individuals across history. All shared one trait: extraordinary memory, eidetic, total recall, or what ancient texts called living scrolls. Most had died young. Some vanished. All left behind cryptic drawings, most unreadable, except for one consistent image: a spiral collapsing inward, a black hole of thought, a mind devouring itself. Elian felt the weight of centuries press against him. What if this was not natural evolution? What if the shrinking brain was a defense mechanism? Or worse, a designed collapse? He had once scoffed at myth, but now fragments of old legends clawed at his reason. The flood, the fall, the tower. Were they not stories of knowledge punished? Had humanity reached too high once and been shattered by some force? And now, in our arrogance, we rise again, but this time from within. A text from an unknown number: "You have 7 days. After that, your mind will belong to them too. Stop digging." There was no name, just a file attachment. He opened it. It was an MRI scan of his own brain, dated yesterday. But he had not been scanned, not voluntarily, and the scan showed something impossible: smoothing in the prefrontal cortex, subtle erosion in the hippocampus, a spiral-like density pattern in the thalamus, exactly like the others. He sat in the darkness, stunned. And then, from deep within the archive vault, behind the shelves of ancient bones, he heard a faint, wet whisper: "Forget." It echoed like a command across time, like something buried in every brain. And Elian Krauss finally realized this was not a theory. This was a curse. Somewhere beneath the Carpathian Mountains, in a sealed archive no map acknowledged, a circle of figures gathered in candlelight. No names, no spoken words. Just the emblem carved on the stone table between them. An open eye bleeding into a spiral. This was Nymacini, not a cult, not quite a resistance. Something older. A society of minds that remembered, in a world increasingly designed to forget. Elian Krauss had been summoned, but not by invitation, by blood. His grandfather, an Austrian field surgeon during World War II, had served under an operation known only as Project Geistwald, Mindfold Project. Files now buried beneath 7 nations. But Nemesini had preserved the truth, that deep in the Alpine bunkers, Nazi scientists weren't just trying to enhance cognition. They were trying to stop the brain from shrinking, because it already had begun. One recovered journal from 1943 described children, born with smooth brains, listen, cephally, but possessing eerie intuitive abilities. They could navigate tunnels in pitch darkness. They drew spirals before they could speak, and many never spoke at all. Elian's grandfather had overseen the last of them. The files hinted at something horrific. Their skulls were injected with liquid quartz, not to kill, but to preserve the shape of their brains, to hold open the crown of the mind before it collapsed. The experiment failed. All the children died, or so it was claimed. Nemesini had tracked one survivor. She lived in northern Lapland, mute, elderly, drawing spirals in the snow with her cane. When shown a scan of Elian's brain, she simply nodded and whispered one word. Again. Back in the present, Elian stood in the heart of Nemesine's hidden library. Not books, but brains. Preserved in glass spheres, suspended in alchemical fluid. Each still pulsed faintly, connected by silver wires. They were not dead, nor alive, but thinking. They are memory vaults, the archivist said, a woman with no name, wearing gloves woven from hair. When the collapse began, the minds that resisted were taken, preserved, because they would not survive in this world. Elian asked the question he had feared for days. Why is it happening? The archivist gestured toward a mural, ancient, perhaps Sumerian. It showed a figure standing upright, with a radiant brain. Around him, others hunched, smaller eyes closed. Above them, a sun crossed out with 7 spirals. Because knowledge is agony, she said. Once the mind reached too far, it saw things. In the dark between atoms, in the silence between stars, and it screamed. We used to remember, she whispered, but memory became a wound. And so, evolution, or something masquerading as evolution, offered relief. Smaller brains, fewer connections, lighter thoughts, shallower dreams. Not to punish us, she said, but to protect us. From what Elian's hands trembled. The archivist showed him one final relic, a stone disc. Perfectly round, no larger than a coin pulled from beneath the oldest layer of Jericho. Carbon dating failed. It was carved into its face. A spiral. On the back, a perfect outline of a human brain. But instead of folds and grooves, there was only a void, and a single inscription in an unknown script. Nemesine's scholars had only translated 4 words. You asked to forget. Elian staggered backward. The MRI, the whispers, the dreams, they weren't coincidence. His mind was unraveling, not as punishment, but because something ancient within him had consented. Because the price of memory was madness. And now, Nemesini offered him a choice. He could walk away, forget everything, let the shrinking continue, live comfortably numb, like billions already had. Or he could join them, preserve his mind, encapsulate it, surrender the body, and remain as memory, not human, not alive, but unshrunk. Elian stood at the threshold of the chamber they called the loom. A spherical room carved into ancient basalt, smooth, seamless, as if melted into shape, not built. At its center hovered a glass vessel suspended by invisible forces. Inside it something pulsed gently, not a heart, not a machine, a brain. His own, perfectly replicated in synthetic tissue, waiting. The archivist spoke without words. Her voice echoed within his skull. Once there were thousands. Now, only 43 remain. Minds that chose to remember. Beyond death, beyond time, you will feel nothing, but you will be preserved. Elian stared at the brain. Its folds shimmered faintly, not shrinking, but still, as if thought itself had been distilled into structure. He remembered something from his childhood, his mother whispering to him during a thunderstorm. Close your eyes. If the dark gets too loud, dream smaller dreams. He had never understood, till now. Was that what all of humanity had done? It's not forgotten by accident, but by choice? He thought of the Neolithic cave spirals, the paintings of eyeless men, the bones of ancestors buried not with weapons, but with blindfolds. He remembered the whispered line from the stone disk, "You asked to forget." Once ago, we had seen something, touched something. Perhaps not a god, not a demon, but a truth so absolute, so shattering, that the collective mind of humanity folded inwards to survive it. And evolution obeyed. Smaller brains, shallower thoughts, safer dreams. We didn't fall. We retreated. He looked up. "Won't surrender," Elian said. "Not because I want to remember, but because someone has to." The archivist tilted her head. "And know this. Those who remember do not sleep, do not age, do not feel joy or pain. You will not live. You will not die. You will simply remain." He nodded and stepped forward. The lights dimmed. The vessel opened like a mechanical flower. The brain inside began to hum. Silver needle pierced the base of his skull. He found his body 2 weeks later, slumped over a desk at the university. Cause of death? Undetermined. The files in his office had been shredded. Hard drives wiped. Brain tissue missing. Authorities ruled it natural. Colleagues remembered him only vaguely. He was quiet, they said. Always distracted. They moved on, as if forgetting were the most natural thing in the world. But deep beneath the earth, in the chamber of the loom, a new vessel joined the others. Elian's thoughts, suspended in ether, whispered endlessly into the darkness. We shrank our minds not from weakness, but mercy. We feared what we once knew, and now even that fear has been forgotten. Somewhere in a glass tube, a ripple of thought glimmered, but not all. The spiral turns again, and the silence begins to listen. So, is the human brain truly shrinking? Yes, the science confirms it. But why? Some say it's efficiency. Others a result of diet, lifestyle, or domestication. Yet the darker theory remains. We are shrinking to forget. Because there are things our ancestors knew, things too big for a brain to hold without breaking. And so, the spiral turns. The skull softens, and the mind sleeps. Not lost. Only hidden, waiting.